All right, got it.
Good. Well, hi.
Hello.
To start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are?
Sure. My name is Rafael Cortina. I'm in San Diego, California. Originally from Tijuana, Mexico, but I'm in San Diego.
And we've decided to do this one in English.
Yes.
Okay.
Hoping that it will reach a broader audience. We'll see.
We'll see. Okay. So the first question that we actually have is, who are you? Who are you as a human being? And that can involve your passions, your qualities, your interests, your values, whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah. Well, I think that uh, one of the key components that I've always been grasping on is to be human more than anything first. And I think in that humanity is I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm a son, and within those relationships is where I think that I'm able to truly see myself and exist in connection with others and the people that I hold dear and I love. So I value in that the closeness and the exchange and the honesty. I think that one of the most valuable experiences I ever had, and I think that it's in a way a dream come true, and in a way it brings the wonderful challenges and difficulties, which is to be a parent. Um, when I was younger, I remember that I always had like this fantasy of one day being a father, and the fantasy always included being a father of a daughter, and it's one of those things that sometimes dream and fantasy come true, and I have one daughter, and that's it. I had just one child, and it has been an amazing experience to be able to see her grow and become a person and see her challenges and see parts of me in her and parts of her mother, and then the best part that are just hers. So I think a big part of who I am and a big component of my life is being her father and being part of a family, and that's something that has always taken precedence before everything else, before being a therapist and being a man in the world. For me, being a father, and in this case a father of a girl, it's a great importance, because I think that I mess up a lot, but in those mistakes that I make, I'm hoping that she's learning how to relate and how to know that she could be respected. Because I guess another part of me being a son of a single mother is that for me, I have a cherish of the power of woman and the power of females. And to be a man that can teach her that she is to be respected and valued, and that her femininity is not a weakness, but a beautiful asset, and that a lot of times as a man, I strive to be in touch with my own femininity, and be in touch with those parts of me that are more nurturing and caring. So being part of her life and seeing her develop, she's 13 now, which is wonderful and scary. Uh, but seeing her develop into her own person, and to know that to shy away from this concepts of and this whole thing with the scary stuff that came out, and this shifting with the Me Too movement and all those things. For me, it's so important that she knows that she has a voice and she has respect. So in some ways, in being a father and being a parent, it's a way that I could see myself being a person that holds to this value of creating a different way of relating. So if I was to say the other aspect that defines me and why being a parent is so important, is because I believe that the way that we create difference, the way that we can create quote unquote a better world, it's in the direct responsibility that we have in the relationships that we have near. And I hold that professionally, I hold that personally, that if I'm able to put on the next person a little bit of love and connection and value, and they could take that on to the next person and the next person, and I could give myself in the best way that I can to the people that I love, I think that that's how we create difference.
Okay, that all makes quite a lot of sense. So the next question, in a sort of relational way, and maybe it's your daughter, I don't know, but who else, what other human being in the world would you say has had the most impact on who you are as a person?
My first impulse is to say my mother, so I'll go with it. Uh, she was,
Freud loves that question.
yes. And my answer fits right into the theory. So, and especially being a Mexican male, to say my mom, it's almost obligated. But I think the reason that she had such an impact on me is, so when I was 2 years old, my parents separated, and from that time on, my father was not in the picture, and she was always someone that, I think that the biggest thing is that she was able to remain positive and loving despite the fact that she had her own suffering and pain. And that, I think that's and not that she necessarily hide away from her suffering and pain, but I think that she took on the responsibility of being a mom of two young boys and a single mom of two young boys. And the reason that I admire is because I think I see my brother and I see myself, and once again, we have plenty of deficiencies and things to work on. But I think that she created two men that are responsible, that value women, that believe that the way that you show up in the world matters, and that being a man doesn't give you privilege, that it gives you responsibility just as much as a woman. So she actually, in her way of being, she taught me that, which is going to go on what I was saying earlier, that there's a sense of equality in the world, and it doesn't matter what your gender is, what your sexual orientation is, what your race is, and she taught me that through her way of being, not her words, which I think is the way that we learn the most. Yeah, and I think that the other piece is that, having someone that believes in you, even if you in your crazy ideas, and she was, with fair level of skepticism, but and she would laugh at my crazy jokes, and she would encourage me to follow my dreams, and I think that, we don't always get that from the people who are guiding us in the world, in our life.
Okay. So another question would be, this is the field theory question. The other one was from Freud. This is the field theory question. What event or circumstance would you say has shaped you in your life, and how?
Yeah. So going back to my father disappearing from my life when I was 2. So the flip side of that, there's always two sides to a story of having a strong mom, was that I bought the story that I did not need a father. And I truly believed that to be true until I was about 20, and I was a psychology student, and I started doing therapy, and I found a Gestalt therapist that I started working with, and suddenly this tremendous longing for a father, not necessarily my father, but a father, and this realization of a gap that I had in my life for a male to guide me. And I think that the fact that my therapist was a man and he was very loving, I realized what I was missing. So at that point, it was very, very painful, and I remember crying, this very deep pain that I was not even aware that I had. It was also surprising to this concept that I grew up believing I don't need my dad, and suddenly coming to this reality that not only did I need him, but there was this emptiness of not having that relationship. So at about 20, decided I want to meet this person. I want to see him face to face, because I realized that it was in some ways, and later I put terms to it in terms of our words, right? It was the kind of like the biggest circle that was open in my life, because I was 2 years old when they separated. I had like small little memories of him, and I wanted to get to know who he was, at least meet him face to face, and I wanted to get a hug from him. So long story short, right? I found that he was living in California, around the LA area. My brother and I went there. This is back in the day when there was no cell phones and no internet. So we stopped at a fast food chain place. It was a payphone with one of those big hanging yellow pages, right? So last name Cortina, not a whole lot, right? So we scanned through the white pages. We found 3 Cortinas. We start calling them. Second person we call, I asked for him. He had a very unique name. And they're like, yeah, let me put him on the phone. So I'm like, hey, this is your son. And he's like, who? And I'm like, your son, Rafael. And he's like, why are you calling me? And I'm like, we're actually at the whatever fast food chain restaurant it was here on the corner of, I think it was like a Toro Road. And he's like, I'll be right there. So he came over, we sat down at the fast food place, talked for a couple hours. And then later on, he, I think, who knows what he was thinking, but later on he said, there's a confusion here. I'm not your father, leave me alone. So I went up a second time, and I said, I called him up and I'm like, I'm in the fast food restaurant once again, because and the reason I went back this time by myself is I didn't get my hug, right? Because it was so shocking the first time. And I said, I'm not going to give up until I get my freaking hug from this guy. So I go up there, he doesn't want to see me. And I'm like, I get it. I'm not your son. I'm just asking for 5 minutes of your time. So he comes over, the weirdest conversation ever, because every sentence started with, I'm not your dad, but I'm really proud of you. I'm not your dad, but if you ever want to talk, you could call me. So as we're walking out, still no hug. And I'm like, I'm just going to go for it. And so I reached over and gave him a big hug. I'm about 6'2". He was pretty short. So it was an interesting hug to a smaller man. And I got my hug, and that's all I needed. And he died 3 months later.
Wow.
Yeah. So the reason that was such a marking experience in my life is before that, I had let fear run my life. I grew up in a very fear-based environment. And in that moment, I'm like, it was part of therapy. I'm not going to let fear make the decisions for me. And that has become part of my journey. When I'm afraid of something that is meaningful to me, I want to do it. I'm pushing myself towards that, right? I was afraid of public speaking, and now I love teaching. And the bigger the audience, the bigger the high, right? So it was a turning point in my life where I was able to tap into my strength and hug this man that was, for all reasons, a stranger in my life, but I knew I needed a hug from my dad so I could have that. And the reason that I needed, tying back to the father thing, there was a part of me that said, I need to have one positive experience with my father, because in my construct of being a father, that's going to help me be a better father versus just have this hatred towards the father figure. So I felt this need to at least have one valuable thing from the man who made me so I could be a better father myself.
That sounds like a lot of determination. Like the white pages, pre-Google, pre-everything. That was...
Yeah, and that was something I didn't know I had until then. Mm-hmm. So that's why it was such a turning point in my life, despite the father stuff. Just knowing that that I had never driven in a freeway, right? And I drove all the way up to LA by myself in a borrowed car from a friend.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. So it was a great experience in so many ways.
My dog is getting really excited about this too. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Part of the
mine will answer eventually. That's all
I'm
right.
sure. They can have another conversation. So the next question that I have is actually, how did you come into Gestalt therapy? Where did you find it? How did that happen?
So actually, it was surprisingly in school, because I don't think we all find it in school. I remember in my school we had a class called Teorías de la Personalidad, Theories of Personality. I think we all have that in some shape or form. And basically what it was is like a little bit of psychoanalysis, a little bit of behaviorism, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And one of the little bits was Gestalt. And I remember when I read it, I fell in love with the theory and the philosophy behind it. Because as soon as I read it, I'm like, this makes sense. It was kind of like, it was almost like I finally found an answer to something that I always kind of knew, but I didn't have the words for it. And I'm sure you had experience like this when you actually read it and you're like, oh, this is me. This resonates to my core. So the view of humanity, the whole is bigger than the parts, all this stuff, right? All those things just it was like it was hitting me. And before that, like probably every psychology student, I was in love with Freud. And then like early psychology student. So it was just like, this is it. So my next task was I need to find a Gestalt therapist. So I feel so blessed that my first therapist ever, Gilberto Zúñiga, I'll say his name because he's amazing in Tijuana, was my first experience in therapy. And it was one of the most amazing growth experiences I ever had. I mean, he's the one that walked me through this thing that I was saying with my dad, and among many, many other things. So my first exposure to Gestalt was first the theory and second as a client. And I just remember there were times that I would be like, I have no idea what this guy did to me, but it was amazing. I want to learn how to do that. So that's how I discovered Gestalt, and going through it as a young psychology student that you think you know everything, but you know nothing. It was just amazing. And it was this thing that it was the language that I needed to speak, and I didn't know I needed it because I was so disconnected from my emotions. I was so disconnected from being able to have the language to make contact with me, that I just fell in love with Gestalt. And soon after I graduated from school, I went to study the specialty in Tijuana. And so Gestalt has been the only theory I have ever worked under. And that makes me super biased, but it also, once you find the thing that works for you, why change it?
It's kind of like being in a monogamous relationship. Like, don't mess with it if it's working, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so what have you done with Gestalt? How do you practice? Where do you take it? What is your thing? What is your particular interest?
Yeah. So I think that my career has been one of unexpected experiences, because when I was in college, I said, I'm never going to work with addiction. I'm never going to work with hospice, with thanatology, because that sounds too scary. And those are the two things that I've enjoyed the most in my life. And discovering, and the other piece that I'm very, very passionate is trauma work. So what has been wonderful for me after I was done with my training in Gestalt, and I was teaching Gestalt for a little bit, I had a falling out in the institute that I was in Tijuana. And it was very painful because the falling out was, of a friendship and a mentor, and that falling out for me, it pushed me towards continuing to live in the world of Gestalt, but by myself, and also forcing my way in the United States in a new country and figuring out how to make it here and how to get my license and 3,000 hours and the masters and the craziness of the test and all this stuff. But the part that I grab onto, and this is something that I heard from Gary Yontef, is you could do a lot of things from the framework of Gestalt, and you might throw a little bit of techniques from other schools, but the framework of the relational aspect of Gestalt, and I think that that's the piece for me that has been the cornerstone of my work. I begin every relationship from that desire to relate with the other and get to know the other. Kind of Herb Polster's idea of every person's life is a novel, for me that resonates too. And being able to truly be invested in getting to know the other. So that eventually led me through working at hospice and working in an intensive outpatient therapy with recovering addicts and so on, in a psych hospital, and in all those places and crazy settings, Gestalt therapy was always present. So I was in a relational experience with a schizophrenic who believed that I was God. And then I was in a relational experience with somebody who has terminal cancer and they're dying. And then I was in a relational experience with someone who just got diagnosed with HIV. So I also worked at the LGBT center, and who has tremendous amount of trauma from growing up in a country where being gay was a crime. And then eventually working with people in recovery. And now that I'm in my own practice, I think that the part that I enjoy the most is working with human beings who are in a place where they live their life believing that their horrible experiences have defined them, and in the process of discovery, they are able to make contact with themselves and realize that the experiences didn't define them. They might have shaped them, but there's no definition. That they're able to work towards self-discovery and living with the pain of things that happen and healing, and it doesn't go away, but that their true self is not the horrible things that happen to them. And I think that's why I'm so passionate to work with trauma. And when you're working with addiction, you're working with trauma. I mean, it's almost impossible not to. Not right away. You eventually get there. And I think that's the piece why I think I have such a huge attunement to working with trauma. And I think because I have to work through my own traumas, and I have a personal experience with it. But more so than that is in that sense of the possibility of rediscovering yourself, despite the fact that you have been through horrific experiences. So it's a very, very long answer to your question.
No, that's okay. You sort of pick up a lot of pieces of a couple other questions that we have, but I am curious. You've spoken to it in a few different parts, but how do you experience yourself as a man, and how has Gestalt helped you understand that, or does it have any relation at all?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. So I think that in the way that I experience myself as a man, I think is and truly, in one way, since the sense of equality for me it's important, and equality in value, and in terms of, I think that the value that we have as beings comes with the fact that we're beings. And that's something that I have come to terms in terms of, if I hold myself in esteem and in value, I hold others at the same level of esteem and value. So for me, being a man to a certain extent is living within those values, but also being flawed. Because I value more and more, the older I get, I value my mistakes. And that has taken a long time, and I don't value them all the time, and I make a lot of them. But I think that in being able to, and it took me a long time to be okay with being wrong, right? Being wrong or perceived wrong or making mistakes, and being able to go to the other and apologize for whatever that effect had on them. So I think that the concept of manhood for me is based on the fact that you are responsible for what you say and what you do. And that includes, I'm responsible for my successes, I'm responsible for my mistakes, I'm responsible for the times that I abuse my power, and being able to come back and recognize it to myself and then to the other. That's where I think it's what being a man is about. Now, the other aspect for me that is valuable in manhood, because I think, once again, I talked about similarities, but I also am fully aware that there are differences, right? We cannot deny those. Is that in expressing my manhood in whatever way I'm expressing it, it includes the parts of me that are traditionally feminine, right? It's kind of like, for me, one doesn't exist with the other, right? And I remember at one point, my wife and I were in couples therapy, and the therapist said, "You're a very, very feminine man." My initial reaction was to be offended by that. And then later on, I'm like, she's right. Right. But it's kind of like my little Mexican machismo little piece that's still there was kind of like saying, "What? You're not effeminate." Right. So, but it's like, it's actually an attribute if I think about it, right? Because it allows me to have a fuller sense of being.
Yeah, like just as
So
an observation, not as a value judgment.
correct. So I think that the way that I believe that I could be a man is to include my ability to express emotions and to love, to be able to cry, which is something I had to learn how to do, because I don't think it's exclusively Mexican, because I deal with a lot of clients from parts of the world that have this, but in Mexico, it's men don't cry. And I truly learned how to be a man that doesn't cry. And then once I relearn how to cry, now I can't stop. But is being able to know that part of being a man is having emotions, and not this idea that a man is a stoic who just stands tall and strong. And actually, the bravest person is the one who's vulnerable. That's real bravery, right? That takes some real balls, not just to stand on the wind and nothing happens to me. And also that when I have to, and I need to, I can be aggressive and protect the people who I love, but only if I have no other option, right? It's so it's kind of like there's strength in vulnerability, and it doesn't mean that you're not able to protect the people who you love.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't take anything away from you.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned a little while ago that there was a bit of a rupture with a particular institution. But I'm wondering, because this is a phrase that comes up fairly often. It may be some mythical thing. I don't know if it has any meaning for you. But do you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community? Does that exist for you? Is that part of your experience?
So as that rupture happened, I completely separated myself from my idea at that time of Gestalt community. And it was years later that I realized that I ended being alone in the island of one of Gestalt. And not that I was not reading and getting informed, but in terms of relating with other like-minded individuals. And it was by chance that I was contacted by someone in San Diego that they were trying to start a Gestalt kind of like support supervision group, something along those lines. And I think it's now been going on for about a year and a half or two. We meet the first Monday of the month, and that's when I realized how thirsty I was for the Gestalt community, and how thirsty I was to be back in circles like this. From that came the need to reconnect, and I applied to present in the European Gestalt Association in Budapest, their conference, and that was kind of like the first step into going back into the Gestalt world in a bigger way. And I realized after presenting there, it was this immediate high of this is what I've been missing. And it was interesting because I didn't realize how much I was affected by that rupture, because I had so many other stuff going on in my life. I had a baby. I had like as I said, getting licensed in the United States. But now, all these years later, I realized two things, and that's I think how you and I met. Is one, I needed to be back in the Gestalt community in the world and having the languages and going to the conferences and teaching and being back in that. And the other piece, and it's funny that we're doing this in English, is that I needed to connect back with the Mexican Gestalt community. And so when we had the conference in La Paz, I'm like, yeah, I'll go, right? It's like, I'm gonna be part of the virtual one, but I'll be there in person, because there was this need to be back in that. And of course now COVID happened and we're all isolating, but it was that kind of like, and that was why I was so excited to meet you back then, because it was like, yeah, this is what I was missing so much. So yes, I do believe that there is a Gestalt community and I'm being part of it again. But I think the difference is that I'm coming to it from a very different need than the one I had before. Because I think the need for me now is to be a part of it, of the discussion, the creation, the feeding the mind and the soul through interesting conversations and hearing other people talk and sharing my thoughts and experiences. Where I think my experience before was in a much younger part of my life, where I was more a student and a teacher. But I think that now it's 20 years of experience that I believe it's kind of like this desire to share my experience as much as to learn.
Yeah, it's sort of more the being with than the getting from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, you get a lot from the being with, which is obviously why I organize these kind of events and meet people like you at them, because it's the same kind of hunger.
Yes.
And we're doing this in English also partly because of that same need that I have, which is like, oh, well, that part of me also wants to reach back out,
Yeah.
into that language, into that culture. I'm not American, like from the US, but your neighbor to the north, right? So
Exactly.
I'm your neighbor to the north and the south, actually.
True. Yeah, and that's why I think that a part of me when I have to choose in terms of how I put myself out there, sometimes I choose English because I want to reach a broader community, and know that I could always go to Mexico and speak in Spanish and be with my people, and I have that access. But I'm also wanting to, and this is something that I'm very proud of my heritage and and being Mexican and being in this world and coming from Tijuana, right? And part of the reason that I'm very proud of is that there's a part of me that is it is, once again, going back to that thing about going to look for my dad, right? You can, right? Anyone can. right? Anyone can if you go for it. Anyone can break the barrier of going into a different language country and exploring and doing things. So in a way, it's also a way of showing that this Mexican kid from Tijuana can do this, so anybody can follow me, and I'm willing to bring anybody with me that wants to come along, because I think that, and it might be some other place in some other part of the world, right? But it's this thing about the part that I have grown comfortable with is, if there is a dream to do something and you do it, and even if it doesn't work out, at least you know, and it's no longer a dream. Now it's a reality that you can't do it, right? And that's a much better reality than, oh man, I wish I would have.
Mm-hmm. Right, because apparently in your history, the door seems to close like fairly shortly thereafter. Like if you didn't get that hug, if you didn't fly to La Paz,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure tanatology has taught you quite a bit about that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. The and that's another piece that I think it's a big part of my work with people in general, right? That I think that eventually most people, if not all, have this, oh man, I wish I could have this. And I truly believe that for the most part, right, unless I want to be an astronaut or something like that, it's never too late to give it a try. I remember when I was a little kid, I wanted to, well, this is going to be a very, very specific San Diego thing, but Shamu is the orca,
Right.
right, that did this show. And growing up, my dream was to be a Shamu trainer. When I was in college, I actually went and figured out what was needed. And I had some of the requirements, but the amount of sacrifice that was necessary, I was not willing to give it, right? But I honestly, I truly believe that I would have not gone and actually applied and asked the questions and figure out what was needed for me to be a trainer, if I would still at this day be saying, man, I probably could have been a trainer instead of a therapist.
I should have tried. I should have
Yeah.
checked. Yeah.
Yeah. But since I actually went and said, yeah, I got to start in the bottom and probably it takes you about 10 years before you get into the pool, I said, yeah, no, that's all right.
Yeah.
And being
Kind of like
freezing
working
water.
at a restaurant for a few years in the kitchen before then. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to be in freezing water like 9 months straight, right? So
Yeah.
it's like,
Maybe
I like,
overrated, but
yeah.
it's good to know. It's good to know. So another question that we do have is, with all of this stuff that you do in Gestalt and your training, your career, all of that part of it, what would you say is your greatest memory? What is that thing that pops up to you right now? You just went for something that was kind of funny to watch.
Yeah.
What is that moment for you?
When I was first thinking of studying Gestalt, right? I'm in San Diego, so Irv and Miriam Polster had their institute here. So I'm like, great, I get to study with them. So I went in and looked them up, and I went and to the address that was on their website in La Jolla, and I knocked on the door, and it was this therapist's office. And he was one of their faculty, and he said, you know, at this moment, we're not doing any more trainings because Miriam is really sick. And then said, call me back in whatever amount of time. So then later on, Miriam passed away, and they said, you know, Irv at this point is probably not going to do any more trainings. So then I went to study in Tijuana, right? Because it was like, this is not going to happen. I really want to study this. So when I was probably about, I think it was my second year of the training, it was a 3-year training, middle point of the training, I said, you know, I really, really want to learn from Polster. You know, he's right here. So I called up this guy that I had his business card, and said, hey, I'm looking for Irving Polster. I'm a student in this institute in Tijuana. I want to invite him to do a training. And then like the next day I get a voicemail at my work line, because I think cell phones were not as efficient as they are now, from Irv. And I mean, I almost passed out, right? I couldn't believe this man was actually calling me back, right? This 20-some-year-old kid. And he, as I'm sure anybody has met him, is an amazing human being. And he was like, So sure, I'll do it. Here's the problem. I don't drive in Tijuana, right? And I would rather like have somebody like pick me up in my house and take me there. And this is my fee. And I'm like, I'll come pick you up, right? You got it. So I went over to my Gestalt training. I said, I talked to Irving Polster. He wants to do a training here. So they made it happen. And I was his driver and translator. And honestly, that was one of the most amazing experiences I ever had in my life, and this forming as a therapist, because as I'm sure you know, having translated, when you're translating, you learn so much more because you don't have the luxury to not pay attention.
You can't miss a word. Or you screw it up for everybody.
Exactly. And in any normal training, at least me with my ADD, I will lose focus, right? And not only that, like being the interpreter when the role modeling is happening, it was this crazy experience. You probably can relate, where you're kind of the therapist and you're kind of the client, and you're feeling both experiences, and you're
I
in the
say it's like
middle of
being
it.
a spiritual medium. It's like they just sort of come through your body and fly out your mouth. It's
Yes,
crazy. And
and
you
there's a
feel it.
moment, yeah, you feel everything, and you're. It's almost like my own voice is gone, right? And I'm just medium. It's exactly it.
Yeah, it usually takes me about 3 days to go back to the office, and I open my mouth and I keep expecting someone else to say something. That's so
Yes.
disappointing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
sorry.
and I had never translated in my life, right? And I'm grateful for the director of the institute who said you could do it, right? You be a translator, and so that was such an amazing experience, because it was telling off me contacting my dad and all those things, and this, like, if I really want something, I'm going to go for it. And I mean, and I've been so blessed ever since to have a connection with Irv, and we once in a while get together for breakfast and that kind of stuff. And every time I'm with him, and it's not. I mean, obviously he's brilliant, but his quality of a human being, right? And the amount that this man has gone through in his life in terms of, talk about pain, right? And that I don't know if I believe is genuine, but when you're talking to him, you feel special, right? Or I feel special. So for me, that is why that experience was so valuable. One is because I actually got to learn from him, which was something that I really wanted, but also just having this role model of therapist, human, father, all those things, and also so willing to talk about his flaws, right? And I think that's the piece when I was saying earlier about what a man looks like. That's kind of it, right? And being able to truly be interested in someone else. For me, it's a privilege of our work, because I think I really like learning about people, and sometimes it's pretty fun that you get paid for doing something you love so much. But it's just that quality of relating that it's so beautiful. So I do believe that, once again, I feel so blessed that so early in my training I had that experience.
Yeah, it's like the height of being a geek when you get that excited about a psychotherapist agreeing to come and do a training. But I'm laughing with you because I go through the same thing. Every time I
Yes.
invite someone and they say yes, I'm like, oh my God. And I look
Yeah.
around, and if there's no Gestaltists, it's not going to make any sense to anyone how excited I am, but
Yes. Yes. Like
it's making it like it matters. It's really
it
exciting.
does, yeah, and especially for us, like the people that we read, especially like Miriam and her books, right? It's such a pivotal book in our training, right? In our theory, and to talk to the man that created those words, and you're right. I mean, later I had like Joseph Sinker and some others, and I went to dinner with Joseph and Irv, and it was like this. Everybody else was, this kid is having dinner with two old men, right? But for me, it was like the top of the world.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. I identify. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
A little geek out there. Yeah. So the last question that I really have would be, what's next? What's next for you? Where would you like to go with this? And
Hmm.
what would you like to see happen with Gestalt?
Yeah. So what's next for me, I think, um, is sharing, and this is kind of like a personal and professional goal. It's finding different avenues and ways of sharing my thoughts, my ideas, my work, in particular with addiction and trauma. Um, and I think I haven't fully defined that in terms of how beyond that. Like I kind of want to write it, I want to teach, and the other piece for me right now is I'm like this willing person to go anywhere as long as I can to teach, to share. You know, if you want me to come over to a little hut in whatever part of the world, and there's enough people interested, and I'll be there. I had like some wonderful opportunities coming up this year, and COVID took care of like postponing everything. I had the opportunity to go do a training in Poland that is now going to be hopefully sometime next year. I'm hoping to be in Madrid next year for the European Association thingy. Um, so what's next for me is taking some of this ideas and thoughts and experience and sharing it with others. And because in sharing it, the thing I love about teaching is it's almost selfish because you learn so much, right? I really do believe sometimes when I teach, I learn more than the people I'm teaching. Um, and being back in the Gestalt community, being back in the Gestalt world, that's what's next. Being able to connect with people, share ideas, learn, continue to develop this. Uh, I also have a piece of work that I want to do with developing trauma awareness and trauma training. That once again has been completely postponed for this year because I want to be able to provide the training for people who are in the front lines of helping people in need. One of the big problems that we have in this border is human trafficking, and that's, for me, that's devastating, and to especially anybody, but to know little children who are being used in such a horrific way. And there are some organizations that do amazing things to help them, but they don't have the knowledge or the resources sometimes, and they're really in need of that. And that's something that is next for me. I don't know how or when yet, especially with this COVID situation, but I want to be able to multiply the awareness and that knowledge to have more trauma informed people who can then help, not necessarily therapists, but just being trauma informed. So yeah, I think around the world of recovery and trauma work, that there's a piece for there than me that is next. And a big part of it is training and sharing ideas. A big part of it is continuing to work with people and reconnecting with the Gestalt community and the Gestalt world. And that's why I'm so excited to work with you and the opportunities that we had, and others, and be able to be sitting here with you right now, because this is a big part of what I want to do with the rest of my life, which is to have like interesting conversations with people about the work that we do and how we can bring others into our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your generosity that actually comes out of random conversations. And you have a very sort of trusting and generous way of sharing what you're doing. And I really do hope that these things come to be. We just need to give the world some more trauma with locking it in and building up the tensions, and
Oh
it'll
yeah.
come. It'll come.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and so much is happening in the world, right? I mean, here in the United States, oh my God! I mean, we probably spend 4 hours talking about that, but
Yeah, let's
we,
not.
yeah, that we have a need for awareness and compassion and healing that unfortunately is only getting bigger.
Exactly. Yep. There's a lot of room for relational work there.
Yeah, too much.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's the part where the training is so important to me, right? and not by me, but by all of us, because I think that after we accumulated some experience, we could help those that are interested in doing this work. And I remember when I was learning, and I still am, right? But when I was a young therapist, having somebody come and share knowledge and experiences with me allowed me to find my voice as a therapist, and feel a little more secure in what I was doing. And that's why I love teaching, because it's a way of passing it on.
Yeah, it's and almost more than passing it on, it's sort of that mentoring and giving that little support as you come into knowing what you know.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add right now?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just that I think that the biggest motivator, right, and what I wanna, the reason that I love sharing with others and being in contact with others is, one, because every time I learn something about myself and about humanity, and most of the time is really positive and beautiful, and that I if I can pass on a little bit of hope that was given to me for people to be able to face themselves and find themselves, that's for me the beauty of life. That's the gift. And I remember a professor of mine in college said the only guaranteed inheritance we get from our parents is their fears. So we have enough to deal with our own to start to be carrying the fears of others. So that's kind of like what I would see part of my mission is, like, let's get rid of some of this crap and this fear that there are not even yours, so you can then live, because that was my experience, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I yeah. Just I want to say thank you for your time and for being here. And if it's okay with you, we will leave it here for now. Does that sound
Yes,
good?
that sounds good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.